"Drive to Providence," the woman said, pressing a card into my palm at the cemetery. "Tell them you're Walter's daughter. They'll know exactly what to do." She was gone before I could ask her name. I remember watching her walk back toward a black car parked along the cemetery road, unhurried, like she had already finished what she came to do. I looked down at the card. No logo, no title. Just a phone number and a street address in Providence, Rhode Island, written in precise blue ink. My father had been in the ground for 40 minutes. There were not many people at the graveside. A few neighbors from his street in Roanoke, a man from his church who played the organ on Sundays, and my brother Ryan, who stood slightly apart from everyone else with his hands in his coat pockets, already scanning the perimeter like he was calculating something. My father was a school custodian for 31 years. He worked at Jefferson Middle School, arrived before the teachers, left after the last bus. He mopped hallways. He replaced ceiling tiles. He knew every child's name who walked through those doors and remembered the ones who came back years later with their own children. No trophies on the shelf, no stories at dinner. He showed up, did the work, and went home. He passed on a Tuesday, cardiac arrest in his kitchen, early morning. His neighbor, Mrs. Holt, noticed his car was still in the driveway Wednesday afternoon and knocked. She was the one who called me. I was at my desk at the law firm where I work as a paralegal, reviewing a deposition summary, and I remember thinking she was calling to ask about the rose bush they shared along the fence line. It took me 3 full seconds to understand what she was actually saying. My older brother Ryan called that evening. Not to grieve, to assess. "So," he said, "do we know what he had?" I told him I hadn't even spoken to the funeral home yet. "I'm just saying," he said, "we should get ahead of it. Dad was always vague about his finances." I told him I'd call him later and hung up. That night I went through my father's house for the first time as its new owner. The will was simple and clean, filed with an attorney in Roanoke 2 years prior. The house came to me. His truck, his savings account, and a modest life insurance policy were to be divided equally between Ryan and me. Everything was tidy. Everything was what you'd expect from a man who budgeted his grocery trips to the dollar. But I kept thinking about the woman at the cemetery. I searched his desk drawers, insurance papers, utility records, a folder of handwritten notes about his vegetable garden. Then, in the bottom drawer of his dresser, I found a shoebox. Inside was a worn leather wallet he no longer used, 2 old photographs, a folded receipt from a hardware store dated 11 years ago, and underneath all of it, a manila envelope sealed with a strip of tape that had yellowed at the edges. My name was written on it in his handwriting. Not my full name, just Claire. I sat on the edge of his bed for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. His handwriting, block letters, slightly uneven the way it always was when he wrote by hand. If you're reading this, then I ran out of time to explain it myself. I'm sorry for that. Drive to Providence. The address is on the card they'll give you. Everything is in order. Trust the process the way you always trusted me. Dad. I read it 4 times. Then I took the woman's card out of my coat pocket and held both pieces of paper side by side. He had known this moment was coming. He had planned for it. I didn't tell Ryan about either the envelope or the card. 2 days after the funeral, I called the number. A man answered on the second ring with the name of a foundation I didn't recognize. I told him I was Walter Hayes's daughter. There was a pause, a brief one, professional and contained. "We've been expecting your call," he said. "When can you come to Providence?" I told him I needed a few days to handle the immediate estate matters. "Of course," he said. "Take the time you need. When you're ready, please bring your identification and whatever documentation you have from your father's estate attorney." He didn't mention money. He didn't mention accounts. He thanked me for calling, said they were sorry for my loss, and hung up. I stood in my kitchen afterward with the phone still in my hand and thought about my father's face. The specific look he had when something was settled in his mind, calm and slightly distant, like he was already past the part that other people found difficult. I had seen that look my whole life and never known what it meant. Now I thought I was beginning to understand. Ryan showed up at the house that weekend. He didn't call ahead. He let himself in with the spare key he had never returned and walked through the living room slowly, touching things. The bookshelf, the side table, the wooden clock on the mantel that had been there since I was 7. "Place feels emptier than I expected," he said. I told him that was probably because Dad was gone. He looked at me briefly, then away. You know, Dad borrowed money from me once, he said, years ago. Never paid it back. I hadn't heard that story before. I told him so. It was only $500, he said. I'm not making a big deal of it. I'm just saying, he was never great with money. Whatever's left, we should divide it quickly and cleanly, before it gets complicated. I asked him what he meant by complicated. He shrugged. Estate stuff drags on. Attorneys take fees. Better to just handle it between us and move on. I told him the attorney had already been contacted and everything was in order. He looked at me the way he used to when we were kids, and I declined to go along with something he had already decided. A slight narrowing of the eyes. Assessment without agreement. We ate sandwiches at the kitchen table and said very little else. He left before dark. That night I booked a train ticket to Providence. I arrived on a Thursday morning. The Foundation's office was on a quiet street near the waterfront, a brick building with a green door and a small brass nameplate beside it. Nothing dramatic, nothing that suggested what I was about to walk into. The man who greeted me was in his mid-50s, dark suit, kind eyes. He introduced himself as David Marsh, the Foundation's director. He led me through a short hallway lined with framed photographs into a conference room with tall windows that looked out over a courtyard garden. He offered coffee. I accepted. Then he opened a folder and placed it on the table between us. Your father established a charitable trust through this foundation in 2004, he said. It has been funded consistently since that time through payroll deductions, annual contributions, and a series of disciplined long-term investments. He paused and looked at me carefully. Are you aware of any of this? I told him I was not. He nodded once, gently, as if he had expected that answer. The trust is currently valued at just over $9 million, he said. The number landed like something physical. I stared at the folder in front of me. My father had earned a custodian's salary for 31 years. He drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it. He bought his jeans at Walmart and fixed his own gutters. $9 million. That can't be right, I said. He turned the folder toward me. The figures were clear and documented. I went through them slowly, page by page, while he sat quietly on the other side of the table. Long-term index funds, he explained. Consistent contributions starting small and growing over time. He never touched the principal. He reinvested every return. Over 20 years, compounding does what compounding does. I looked up at him. What was it for? He folded his hands on the table. The trust was established to fund full scholarships for first-generation college students from low-income households in the Roanoke Valley. Students whose parents had not attended college, whose families could not carry the cost, and who had demonstrated both need and effort. Since 2006, the trust had sent 43 students to college. 11 had already graduated. 2 were in medical school. I sat back slowly in my chair. He never mentioned any of this, I said. No, David Marsh said. He was very specific about that. The students never knew his name. The foundation administered the funds and he asked only for annual reports, which he read and then returned. He didn't want recognition. He wanted results. I thought about the photographs in his shoebox. 2 of them. I had looked at both briefly but not closely enough to recognize anyone. Now I wondered if they were students. If he had kept small, quiet evidence of a life that had mattered in ways none of us knew, I asked about the structure of the trust. Who controlled it now? You do, David said. You are named successor trustee. The funds cannot be dissolved or redirected without your authorization. Everything continues unless you choose to change it. My phone buzzed on the table. Ryan's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. David Marsh slid an envelope across the table. There is also a letter, he said. Your father left it with us to be given only after his passing. The envelope was white, sealed, and slightly worn at the corners as if it had been handled carefully over years of waiting. My name was on the front in the same block handwriting as everything else he had ever written me. I opened it slowly. The paper inside was a single sheet, college-ruled, written front to back. Claire, I know this will surprise you. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was afraid that knowing would change how you saw it, and I needed it to stay clean. When you were 12, you asked me why I chose this job. You thought I was disappointed in myself. I wasn't. I chose it because it kept me close to kids who needed steadiness around them. I watched a lot of them go home to situations I couldn't fix. But I could fix one thing. I could make sure the ones who tried hard enough, who showed up every day and still couldn't see a way forward, I could give them a door. I don't want this money split up or spent on things that didn't come from effort. I want it to keep working. I want it to keep opening doors. You always understood that kind of thinking. Ryan never quite did, and I love him for other reasons. Take care of it the way you'd take care of something that mattered. That's all I'm asking. Dad. I reread the letter twice before I folded it and placed it back in the envelope. My hands were steady. My eyes were not. David Marsh pretended to review a document. After a moment, I asked him about the woman at the cemetery. He told me her name was Judge Patricia Elmore, a retired federal judge who had served on the foundation's board for 12 years. She and my father had corresponded for 2 decades. She had attended his funeral to represent the foundation and because, he said carefully, she had wanted to. He respected her work, David said, and she respected his. I thought about that on the walk back to the station. My father, the school custodian, corresponding with a federal judge for 20 years about the futures of children neither of them would ever formally meet. No press releases, no award dinners, just letters and annual reports, and a quietly growing number in a foundation's ledger. Ryan called 4 more times before I boarded the train back to Virginia. I answered on the last one. "Where have you been?" he asked immediately. I told him I had been handling paperwork related to the estate. What kind of paperwork? Attorneys don't work on Thursdays in another state. I hadn't mentioned Providence. I asked how he knew I was out of state. He said he had called the house and gotten no answer, then called my cell phone twice before. "Ryan," I said, "there's something I need to tell you, but I need a few days to understand it fully myself before we talk." "Is there money?" He asked the question the way he always did, directly, without apology, as if it were the only reasonable question. I looked out the train window at the darkening fields. "Yes," I said. "There's something." A long pause. "How much?" he asked. I told him I needed more time. He exhaled in the specific way that had always communicated frustration without commitment to a particular feeling. "Fine," he said, "but don't do anything without talking to me first." After we hung up, I took out my father's letter and read it a 3rd time. I don't want this money split up or spent on things that didn't come from effort. He had known this conversation was coming. He had written around it in the only way he knew how, directly and without performance. Ryan came to Roanoke the following Tuesday. I had asked him to come. I sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where my father had done the crossword puzzle every Sunday morning, and I walked him through the documents the same way David Marsh had walked me through them. I didn't hand him the papers. I talked him through them. He listened without speaking until I mentioned the number. $9 million, he said flatly. I confirmed it. He was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. "And it's all tied up in this foundation?" "It's a trust," I said, "structured for a specific purpose. For strangers, for students who needed help." He leaned back in the chair. That familiar look again, the recalibrating one. "While we were borrowing money from him," he said slowly. "While I was borrowing money from him, he had $9 million sitting in Rhode Island. He helped you because he loved you," I said. "This was separate." "How is that separate?" His voice rose slightly. "He could have paid off my house. He could have fixed what I was dealing with. Instead, he was funding college kids he didn't even know their names?" "He knew what he was doing," I said. "It's not his money to decide that with," Ryan said. "Not unilaterally. We're his family. He made those decisions over 20 years, I told him. He had every right to." Ryan stood up and walked to the window. He stood there looking out at the backyard, at the vegetable garden that was already starting to go to seed without anyone tending it. "You're going to keep it running, aren't you?" he said. It wasn't a question. That's what he asked me to do. He turned around. "And I get nothing." "You got help," I said carefully. "More than once. The records show that." "That was different," he said quickly. "That was family. This is an inheritance. It's a responsibility." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's easy to say when you're the one holding it." He left without finishing his coffee. That evening, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize, a law firm in Richmond, a brief message asking me to confirm my contact information regarding the estate of Walter Hayes. Ryan had moved fast. He filed within 2 weeks. Undue influence, improper disclosure, failure to provide equitable distribution to surviving heirs. The same categories, dressed in different language. His attorney argued that my father had structured the trust in a way that deliberately disadvantaged his son, and that as a surviving heir under Virginia law, Ryan had standing to challenge the distribution. My father's estate attorney in Roanoke referred me to a colleague who specialized in trust litigation. Her name was Carol Simmons. Gray hair pulled back tightly. Navy veteran, no wasted words. She reviewed every document I had from Providence, every page of the trust agreement, and every notation from my father's estate file. "This is thorough," she said. "Your father was deliberate. He expected this," I told her. She looked at me over her reading glasses. "The trust predates any applicable claim by nearly 2 decades," she said. "It was properly established, properly funded, properly referenced in the will. There is no evidence of undue influence because your father was the one exerting the influence. His influence. On his own money. Ryan's attorney is going to argue that we were kept in the dark," I said. "Being kept in the dark is not the same as being harmed," she said. "He had no legal obligation to tell you or your brother about assets he was directing to a separate charitable trust during his lifetime. Will it hold?" "Yes," she said. "If what you've given me is complete, it holds." I asked her to proceed. The first hearing was in a courtroom in downtown Roanoke on a gray Wednesday morning. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, a water stain on the ceiling tile above the plaintiff's table that I spent a great deal of time staring at. Ryan sat at the opposite table with his attorney. He looked older than I had seen him in years, not physically, but in posture. Something settled and tired. He didn't look at me when our case was called. His attorney argued that the trust had been structured in a way that violated the reasonable expectations of biological heirs, and that my father's long-standing financial assistance to Ryan constituted an implicit acknowledgement of ongoing obligation. Carol responded without raising her voice. "The trust predates any relevant claim. It was legally established, consistently maintained, and disclosed in the decedent's will by explicit reference. There is no cause of action here." The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, reviewed the filing and requested additional documentation. She scheduled a follow-up. Outside the courtroom, Ryan caught me in the hallway. "You could end this," he said. "I'm not ending it. $9 million and you won't give your own brother a reasonable share?" "It's not mine to give," I said. "It was never mine. Dad directed it somewhere and I'm honoring that." Ryan looked at me the way he had looked at our father sometimes, with something between frustration and a grief he didn't know how to name. "You always thought you understood him better than me," he said. I thought about that. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I just listened more." He walked away before I could say more. The second hearing brought in the foundation's documentation. 20 years of investment records, contribution logs, disbursement summaries, 43 scholarships, 11 graduates. A record as clean and consistent as anything I had ever seen in 10 years of legal work. On the morning of the third hearing, Judge Patricia Elmore arrived. She walked in quietly, took a seat in the gallery, and said nothing until Carol called her as a witness. Then she walked to the stand with the same unhurried certainty she had shown at the cemetery. She testified for 12 minutes. No theatrics, no emotional appeals. She explained how she had come to know my father. He had written to the foundation in 2003 inquiring about the process for establishing a charitable education trust. His letter had been 1 paragraph long, handwritten, and contained every relevant question in the correct legal order. She had written back. They had corresponded for 20 years. She described him as the most disciplined donor she had encountered in 30 years of work in charitable law. Not the wealthiest, not the most prominent, the most consistent. Ryan's attorney suggested that her relationship with my father had created an undue influence on the structure of the trust. She looked at him calmly. "Walter Hayes," she said, "did not take suggestions about how to use his money from anyone, including me." The documentation reflects that clearly. Several of his early contribution strategies differed from my recommendations. His turned out to be more effective. There was a slight shift in the room after that. Not dramatic, just a change in the air. The judge recessed briefly. When she returned, she did not take long. "The trust is valid," she said. "Properly established, properly maintained, properly disclosed. The petitioner's claim is dismissed. No gavel slam, no gallery reaction. Just a clerk making a notation." Outside on the courthouse steps, Ryan stood beside his truck for a long time. His attorney was already on his phone. Ryan wasn't looking at anything in particular. When I walked past him, he said, without turning, "You really weren't going to fold." "No." He exhaled slowly. "I'll have to pay his fees now." "Probably," I said. He finally looked at me. "Was any of it real?" he asked. "Any of it for us?" I thought about the letter. The way my father had written around Ryan's name, careful and deliberate, choosing love as his framing even when the news was not what Ryan would have wanted. "It was real," I said. "It just looked different than you expected." He drove away before I could finish the thought. I drove to Richmond on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the ruling. Ryan's townhouse had the same slightly overgrown lawn it always did, the same porch light that had needed replacing for 2 years. His truck was in the driveway. He answered the door slowly, like he had been awake for a while but hadn't moved much. "Can I come in?" He stepped back without answering. I took that as yes. We sat at his kitchen table. There were bills on the counter. Not unusual for Ryan. "I'm not here to review what happened," I said. "Then why are you here?" "Because Dad built a provision into the trust for direct family support. Structured, conditional, tied to accountability. It wasn't in the main document. It was in a secondary clause." Ryan looked at me carefully. "He didn't cut you out," I said. "He put a fence around it." "What kind of fence?" "Annual distributions tied to financial counseling and documented progress. A financial advisor, paid for by the trust. A structured debt repayment timeline. No lump sum, no blank check." Ryan leaned back. He looked at the ceiling. "So he wanted to manage me from the grave. He wanted to help you without watching it disappear again," I said. "There's a difference. You sound like him." "I've been told that." He was quiet for a moment. "What if I say no?" "Then nothing changes," I said. "The trust continues. The students get their scholarships. You keep handling your finances on your own." He rubbed his face with both hands. "He was so proud of you," he said. "He never said it, but you could see it." "He was proud of you too," I said. "He told me once that you had more raw intelligence than anyone he knew. He said you just kept betting on shortcuts." Ryan gave a short, tired laugh. "That sounds right." We spent the next hour going through numbers. What he owed across 4 accounts. What a 5-year repayment timeline would look like with structured support versus continuing the way he had been going. It wasn't a glamorous conversation. It was a spreadsheet and a legal pad and 2 cups of coffee that went cold before we finished. When I stood to leave, he walked me to the door. "He really built all that," Ryan said. "On a custodian's salary." "Yes." He shook his head slowly. "I thought he was being tight all those years. I thought he was holding out." "He was holding it for something," I said. Ryan leaned against the doorframe. "It just wasn't what we thought." "No," I said. "It wasn't." He didn't say anything else. But he didn't close the door until I had reached my car. A year after the court dismissed Ryan's claim, we drove together to Roanoke on a Sunday morning in late October. Not because the trust required it, not because any attorney had suggested it, because the anniversary felt like the kind of thing that needed to be acknowledged. My father's headstone was simple. His name, his dates, and a single line he had asked for, which the estate attorney found in a sealed note. Showed up, did the work. Ryan stood beside me with his hands in his coat pockets, the same posture he had at the funeral, but quieter now. The sharp current that used to run through him had dulled. Not gone, just steady. He had completed 6 months of financial counseling, paid down 1/3 of his debt, sold a motorcycle he didn't use. He hadn't become a different person. He had become a more careful version of the one he already was. The trust had sent 7 new students to college that fall. One of them, a girl from Roanoke City, had written a letter to the foundation saying she was the first person in her family to go to university, that she didn't know who to thank because she didn't know the donor's name, but she wanted whoever it was to know that she understood what had been given to her. David Marsh had forwarded the letter to me. I had kept it. Ryan looked at the headstone for a long time. "I used to think he was ordinary," he said finally. "He was," I said. "That was the point." Ryan looked at me sideways. "Ordinary people can do extraordinary things if they're consistent enough," I said. That's what he was trying to show us, both of us. Ryan looked back at the stone. He was quiet for a moment. "Do you think he knew I'd fight you?" "Yes," I said. "And he still set it up this way." He set it up for what would last, I said. Not for what was easiest. Ryan nodded slowly. That does sound like him. We stood there a little longer. The wind moved through the trees the way it had the morning of the funeral, low and steady, bending the small flags planted in the grass along the row of stones. Some things don't change. Some things aren't supposed to. Before we left, Ryan cleared his throat. I'm sorry, he said. For the filing. For pushing. I know. I just thought, he said, and then stopped. I waited. I thought if there was money, maybe that meant he had believed in something for us all along. That he had been saving it. He was saving it, I said. For all of us. Just not the way you thought. Ryan didn't say anything after that. He didn't need to. On the drive back, I thought about the first time I had read my father's letter in that quiet conference room in Providence. Sunlight coming through tall windows, a cup of cold coffee beside me. He had written simply and directly, the way he had always done everything. I want it to keep working. I want it to keep opening doors. For a while after that day, the number had been the thing I couldn't stop thinking about. 9 million. The weight of it. The responsibility of it. But over time, the number had receded. What stayed was something harder to name, the image of 43 young people who had walked through a door that existed because a man got up early every morning, mopped hallways no one would ever praise him for, and quietly put aside what others would have spent. No trophies on the shelf, no stories at dinner. Just steady. There were nights in that first year when the paperwork overwhelmed me. The disbursement schedules, the foundation meetings, the annual reviews of scholarship recipients. There were moments when I considered simplifying it, consolidating, finding an easier arrangement. Each time, I thought about the letter, the clean handwriting, the single request that hadn't come with any conditions except the most honest one. Take care of it the way you'd take care of something that mattered. I had a photograph on my desk now. One of the two from the shoebox. 2 people standing in front of Jefferson Middle School. My father, years younger, in his work clothes, and a teenage girl holding up a paper, squinting into the sun. I didn't know who she was. I didn't need to. What mattered was that he had kept it, that it had meant enough to carry. Ryan meets with his financial advisor twice a month now. He texts me updates sometimes, not because our agreement requires it, but because he started to, and then kept doing it. Small things. Paid down another card. Closed the account I'd been meaning to close for years. His words, not mine. We still disagree sometimes. We still have history, the kind that doesn't dissolve in a courtroom or across a kitchen table. But the resentment that used to sit between us like a third party in every conversation is quieter now. Not gone. Just no longer in charge. The trust will continue long after I'm gone. It's structured that way. My father thought in decades. I'm learning to do the same. I used to believe that legacy was something you built loudly, that people needed to know your name for it to count, that the measure of a life was in what people said at the service. My father's service had a handful of people and a folding chair with a loose leg. His trust had 43 students, 11 graduates, 2 in medical school, and a letter from a girl in Roanoke who didn't know his name but understood exactly what he had given her. He didn't need a trophy. He needed results. If there is someone in your life who has lived quietly, who showed up without announcement and worked without praise, I hope you'll take a moment today to see them clearly. Not for what they had, for what they were building while you weren't looking. Because sometimes the most important thing a person leaves behind has nothing to do with what's in a will. And if you believe that steady matters more than loud, I hope you'll stay with this channel. Leave a comment and tell me about someone who lived that way. Someone who showed up and did the work. Because sometimes the greatest thing you can inherit isn't money. It's a standard worth keeping.